Welcome to the botany class, and today we are continuing the ecosystems topic. And we stopped at the uh, symbiotics, symbiosis, and one of the uh, types of the symbiotic re- relationship is mutualism. And mutualism is a symbiotic relationship in which both partners benefit. For example, mycorrhiza are mutual associations between fungi and the roots of almost all plants. The fungus absorbs phosphorus and other essential minerals from the soil and provides the plant, and the plant provides the fungus with the carbohydrates produced by photosynthesis. Plants not only grow more vigorously in the presence of mycorrhizae, but better tolerate environmental stresses such as drought and high soil temperatures. A remarkable example of mutualism occurs in the rainforests of South and Central America between ants and wasps and flowering vines. Vines that produce white-red color uh, are usually pollinated by hummingbirds, which obtain a reward of nectar from the blossoms here, from this one. Some insects, however, try to rob the flower of its nectar without performing the important task of pollination. Ants or wasps come into this picture at this point. So this is an ant. These insects patrol the plant and attack any would-be nectar-robbing insects. Uh, in exchange for the vigilance, the ant gods are rewarded with nectar, which is produced in the plant's leaves. Uh, but are not shown here, so still, this is a protective ant. So it's warrior ants. So the ants are like they have a specialization, like they are working ants, and yeah, warrior ants. There is also a mother ant. So warriors are actually protecting something. In this case, they're protecting the source of the food. So the next one is a commensalism. Yeah, that is a type of some symbiosis in which one organism benefits and the other is neither harmed nor helped. One example of commensalism is the relationship between a rainforest tree and epiphytes, smaller plants that grow on other plants. So this is a rainforest, so this is a small plant. Spanish moss, orchids, and bromeliads are examples of the epiphytes. Most epiphytes anchor themselves on tree branches but do not obtain nutrition or water directly from the trees. Their location lets them obtain adequate light, rainwater dripping down the branches, and required minerals which are washed out of the tree's leaves by rainfall. Thus, the epiphyte benefits from the association while the tree remains largely unaffected. Uh, and the next one, so some uh, uh, epiphytes are also parasitic. So next one relationship is a parasitism, in which the one member is the parasite benefits and the other, the host, is adversely affected. The parasite obtains nourishment from its host and although a parasite may weaken its host, it rarely kills it. Many parasites do not cause disease, but some do. When a parasite causes disease and sometimes the death of a host, the parasite is called a pathogen. So, like most of the pathogens in and diseases in during the that cause diseases, the mistletoes are some of the best-known parasites seed plants, mainly because of their popularity at Christmas time. About 1,300 species of mistletoes are known to parasite conifer and hardwood trees, particularly in the tropics. Mistletoes anchor themselves to their host by means of adventitious roots that penetrate the branch through the host species. So the uh, mistletoes are water robot, that is, they take water and minerals from their host, but not carbohydrates produced by photosynthesis. An interesting example of parasitism involves the fungus Picunia moniaca, which parasites rock grass, a plant widely distributed across the northern part of the Northern America. When Picunia infects rock grass, it does not kill the plant immediately, but it changes the plant's growth pattern. An infected plant grows much taller than normal and produces a cluster of leaves at its top. The fungal mycelium, which is bright yellow, grows on and eventually covers these leaves, giving them the appearance of buttercup flowers. The the fungus also secretes a sugary solution and produces a strong scent, imitating the nectar and aroma of flowers. This elaborate mimicry increases the chances of successful fungal reproduction by attaching insects to the fungal flowers. Sexual reproduction in Picunia requires the union of nuclei from two mating types. Insects are attracted to the flowers, where they eat the sugary syrup. As the insects feed, pieces of the fungus cling to their bodies, flying from the one Picunia flower to another. The insects distribute complementary mating types from fungus to fungus over a broad area. Rockcress prays for this parasitic relationship with altered growth and an early death. So the species or keystone species are crucial in determining the nature of the entire community, and other species of a community depend on or are greatly affected by the keystone species. Keystone species are usually not the most abundant species in the community. Although present in relatively small numbers, the individuals of a keystone species profoundly influence the entire community because they often affect the amount of available food, water, and some other resource. Thus, the impact of keystone species is greatly disproportionate to other abundance. Identifying and protecting keystone species are crucial goals of conservational biology, because if a keystone species disappears from a community, many other species in that community may become more common, rare, or even disappear. One problem with the concept of keystone species is that it is difficult to measure all the direct and indirect impacts of a keystone species on other organisms in a community. Consequently, most evidence for the existence of keystone species is based on indirect observations rather than on experimental manipulations. For example, consider the fig tree. Uh, because fig trees produce a continuous crop of fruits. They may be keystone species in tropical rainforests of Central and South America. Fruit-eating monkeys, birds, bats, and other fruit-eating vertebrates of the forest do not normally consume large quantities of figs in their diets. During that time of the year when other fruits are less plentiful, however, fig trees become important in sustaining fruit-eating vertebrates. It is therefore assumed that should the fig trees disappear, most of the fruit-eating vertebrates would also disappear. If, in turn, the fruit eaters disappear, the spatial distribution of other fruit-bearing plants will become more limited because the fruit-eating eaters help disperse their seeds. Thus, protecting fig trees in tropical rainforests probably increases the likelihood that monkeys, birds, bats, and many other tree species will survive. The question is whether this anecdotal evidence of fig trees as keystone species is strong enough for policymakers to grant special protection to fig trees. In contrast to keystone species which have a large impact out of proportion of their abundance, dominant species greatly affect the community because they are very common. Uh, Trees, the dominant species of forest, change the local environment. Trees provide shade, which changes both the light and moisture availability on the forest floor. Trees provide numerous habitats and microhabitats, such as a hole in a tree trunk, for other species. Forest trees also provide food for many organisms and therefore play a large role in energy flow through the forest ecosystems. Similarly, cordgrass is the dominant species in salt marshes, prairie grass in grasslands, and kelp in kelp beds. Typically, a community has one or a few dominant species, and most other species are relatively rare. A new community does not spring into existence overnight but develops gradually through a series of stages, each dominated by different species. The process of community development over time, which involves a species in one stage being replaced by other species, is called ecological succession or simply succession. An area is initially colonized by certain early successional species that give way over time to mid-successional species, which in turn give way much later to late successional species. Ecological succession is usually distributed in terms of the changes in the plant composition of the area, although each succession stage also has its own characteristic kinds of animals and other organisms. The time involved in ecological succession is tens, hundreds, or thousands of years. Ecologists distinguish between two types of successions, primary and secondary. In primary succession, is the change in species composition over time in an area not previously inhabited by plants or other organisms. No soil exists when primary succession begins. Bare rock surfaces like this, uh, such as recently formed volcanic lava and rocks scraped clean by grass shell action, are examples of sites where primary succession might occur. Exposed rock is an inhospitable environment that few organisms can tolerate. The temperature of barren rock may be quite high in the sunlight, and unless rain is falling, the rock may be totally devoid of moisture. Whatever minerals are present in the rock are locked up in its hard crystalline structure, so are unavailable to organisms. In primary succession on bare rock, the details vary from one site to another, but usually the first community that is observed consists of lichens, also mosses. Because lichens are the first organisms to colonize bare rock, they are called pioneers. Lichens live on the surface of many rocks and beneath the surfaces of porous rocks in a sheltered and somewhat moisture habitat. Lichens are resistant to desiccation. They cease to grow when water is unavailable but quickly resume active growth when moisture returns. They can absorb their own weight in water within moments of moisture. With the passage of time, several important cumulative changes occur. The biomass of the lichen community increases, the lichens secrete acids that help break the rock apart, and as a result, fine particles of rock become attached from the rock's surface or even within the rock itself. As lichens die, their decomposing remains mix with the rock particles to form a rudimentary soil. Water is absorbed and retained in the tissues of the lichens and in the new thin soil layer for longer periods than before. As these changes occur, an increasing number of small organisms move into the area and make their homes in the lichens and soil. These changes increased biomass, soil development and water retention, and increased number of organisms, moderate and harsh conditions under which the pioneer community lives, making it possible for mosses to grow there. In fact, since mosses grow faster than lichens, they tend to replace the lichens. The greater productivity leads to the greater accumulation of biomass and ultimately of soil. This leads to further habitat change. Over time, the moss community may be replaced by drought-resistant ferns, followed by the uh, uh, grasses and herbs. Once sufficient soil has accumulated, grasses and ferns are replaced by low shrubs, which in turn may be replaced by the forest trees in several distinct stages. Primary succession from a pioneer community on bare rock to a forest community may take hundreds or thousands of years. The Indonesian island of Krakatoa was provided scientists with a perfect long-term study of primary succession in a tropical rainforest environment. In 1883, a volcanic eruption destroyed all life on the island. Ecologists have surveyed the island in the more than 100 years since the devastation to document the return of life forms. As of the 1990s, ecologists had found that the progress of primary succession to a diverse tropical rainforest community was slow, in part because of Krakatoa's isolation. Many species are limited in their ability to disperse over water. Krakatoa's forest, for example, may have only one-tenth of the tree species richness of undistributed tropical rainforest of nearby islands. The lack of plant diversity has in turn limited the number of colonizing animal species. In a forested area of Krakatoa, where zoologists would expect more than 100 butterfly species, for example, there are only 2 species. Secondary succession is the change in the species composition over time in an area already substantially modified by its pre-existing community. So is largely represented as these sites: an abundant field and an area cleared by a forest fire are common examples of sites where secondary succession occurs. Since the late 1930s, many ecologists have studied secondary succession on abandoned farmland. Although all the stages of secondary succession may take more than 100 years to occur at a given site, it is possible for a single researcher to study oat-field succession in its entirety by observing sites in the same area that were abandoned at different times. Often the ecologist accurately determines where each field was abandoned by examining court records. One heavily studied example of secondary succession is the regrowth of abandoned farmland in North Carolina. Abandoned farmland in North Carolina is colonized by a predictable sequence of plant communities. The first year after cultivation ceases, annual and perennial herbs grow in abundance, but crabgrass is by far the most common species. In the second year, a horseweed, a tall horse annual, is the main species. Horseweed does not remain dominant more than 1 year, however, because decaying horseweed roots inhibit the growth of young horseweed seedlings. In addition, horseweed does not compete well with plants that become established in the third year, including broomsedge. Typically, broomsedge like this uh, broomsedge outcomes other plants because it is more tolerant of droughts. Broomsedge continues to be dominant for the next few years. In years 5 to 15, the dominant plant in the abandoned farmland are pines, such as shortleaf pine on drier sites or loblolly pine on moisture sites. So like this one. This is loblolly pine. Although shading and the buildup of litter, it is pine needles and branches in the soil, the growing pines produce conditions that cause the early dominant plants to decline in importance. Over time, pines give up their dominance to hardwoods such as oaks and hickories. This stage of secondary succession depends primarily on the environmental changes produced by the pines. The pine litter causes soil changes such as adding dents in water's holding capacity that are necessary for young hardwood seedlings to become established. In addition, young pine seedlings do not thrive in the shade of older trees, whereas hardwood seedlings do. During the summer of 1988, root fires burned approximately one-third of Yellowstone National Park. This natural disaster provided a valuable chance for ecologists to start a secondary succession in areas that had been forests. After the conflagration, gray ash covered the forest floor, and most of the trees, although standing, were charred and dead. Secondary succession in Yellowstone has occurred rapidly since 1988. In the following spring, throat lily and other herbs sprouted and covered much of the ground. 10 years after the fires, a young forest of knee-high to shoulder-high lodgepole pines dominated the area, and Douglas fir seedlings began growing. Ecologists continue to monitor the changes in Yellowstone as secondary succession unfolds. Early studies suggested that succession inevitably produced to stable and persistent community known as a climix community, which was determined solely by climate. Periodic disturbances such as fires or floods were not thought to exert much influence on uh, climax communities, and the climax community was distributed in any way, it would return to a self-sustaining, stable equilibrium in time. This traditional view of stability has fallen out of favor. The apparent endpoint stability of species composition in a climax forest is probably the result of how long trees live relative to the human lifespan. It is now recognized that forest communities never reach a state of permanent equilibrium, but instead exist in a state of continual disturbance. The species composition and relative abundance of each species vary in a mature community over a range of environmental gradients. Although the community retains a relatively uniform appearance overall, uh, so and so the uh, like uh, like in most of the ecosystems. Our life would not be possible without the abiotic environment. As the sun warms the planet, it powers the hydrologic cycle uh, that drives oceans currents and atmospheric circulation patterns and produces much of the climate to which organisms have adapted. Um, so I think it's like this. So the sun also supplies the energy that almost all organisms use to carry on life processes. Individual communities and their abiotic environments are ecosystems which are the basic units of ecology. An ecosystem encompasses all the interactions among organisms living in a particular place and among those organisms that and their abiotic environment. Ecosystem interactions are complex because each organism responds not only to the other organisms but to conditions in the atmosphere, soil, and water. In turn, organisms exert an effect on the abiotic environment. Like communities, ecosystems vary in size, lack precise boundaries, and are nested within large ecosystems. The branch of ecology that analyzes the movements of energy and matter through large numbers of organisms and the abiotic environment is known as ecosystem ecology. The passage of energy in linear or one-way direction, although an ecosystem is known as energy flow, energy enters an ecosystem as the radiant energy of the sunlight. Uh, some of which is trapped by plants during the process of photosynthesis, but a little only a little amount is captured. This energy now in chemical form is stored in the bonds of organic molecules such as glucose. When the molecules are broken apart by cellular respiration, the energy becomes available to do work such as tissue repair, production of body heat, and reproduction. Uh, so mostly as a heat chain. As the work is accomplished, the energy escapes the organism and disperses into the environment as low-quality heat. Ultimately, this heat energy radiates into space. Thus, once organisms use energy, it becomes unavailable for reuse. So, like if you have eaten uh, 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 a cake, then you cannot uh, eat it once again. So In an ecosystem, energy flow can be traced through food chains, in which chemical energy passes from one organism to the next in a consequence. So food chains here. So the uh, producers from the beginning of the food chain uh, by capturing the sun's energy through photosynthesis. Herbivores and omnivores eat plants uh, to obtain the chemical energy of the producer's molecules as well as building materials from which to construct tissues. In turn, carnivores and omnivores consume herbivores and uh, uh, reap the energy stored in the herbivores molecules. At the end of the food chain are decomposes and decomposes through cellular respiration break down organic molecules in the carcasses and body wastes of all other members of the food chain. The most important things to remember about energy flow in a food chain is that it is linear or unidirectional. That is, stored chemical energy moves from one organism to the next as long as it is not used. Like if you capture uh, a mice and uh, eat the mice, so if you prepare, if you uh, roast mice and eat the mice, then you cannot um, uh, make the mice live again. So it's only one direction. So before you eat your mice, uh, uh, you should think maybe you should let the mice go so it can live. So you will not regret later. So the same is with the sheep, cows, and other animals. So that is why before eating the animal, think uh, several times, and because you cannot, the process is only one way, so you cannot uh, kill animal and then uh, uh, make it live again. So that is why make sure that you kill it correctly. So uh, so the stored chemical energy moves from one organ to the next as long as it is not used. After an individual uses that energy to do work, however, it is unavailable for any other organism because it has changed into heat energy that displaces in the environment. Each level in a food chain is called a trophic level. The first trophic level is made up of the producers, organisms that photosynthesize. The second trophic level is made of the primary consumers, uh, that are herbivores. The third trophic level, secondary consumers, carnivores, and so on. So fourth level are tertiary consumers, and then fifth level, humans like here, or some animals, or like tigers, wolves, and foxes. Food chains as simple as one I just described rarely occur in nature because few organisms eat just one other kind of organism. More typically, the flow of energy materials through ecosystems takes place within a range of food choices for each organism. In an ecosystem of average complexity, numerous alternative pathways are possible. Thus, a root web, an aggregate of interconnected food chains in an ecosystem, is a more realistic model of the flow of energy through ecosystems. So, something like this. So, this is a food chain. Who eats whom? Or another uh, name for this food chain is who eats whom. Everyone eats everyone. Oh, so it's very uh, interconnected. So, like here, we can see that the uh, ants eat wood, and then birds eat ants and butterflies. So then uh, the uh, uh, foxes will. So the some uh, mosquitoes will eat foxes, and then the foxes will uh, eat small animals and also birds. And then uh, foxes will eat, I think, also some large animals. And owls, the owls will eat mice, and mice will eat uh, the bugs. So like it's very interconnected. So I think that we will stop right here in this funny picture, and then we will continue 2 weeks later. Thank you for your attention, and see you 2 weeks later.